Hello and welcome to the Flex. It's Matt St. Jean here with Joe Howie, bringing you coverage for the first place in the Big East, Providence Friars, the 5-0 in the Big East. Providence Friars, the 8-game win streak. Providence Friars, fresh off a big win over UConn last night. How you feeling, Joe?
Matt, I was at the game. My throat is killing me from the amount of screaming that happened in the amp last night. But let me tell you, I've been to a lot of Providence games in the past couple years, and in terms of atmosphere alone, last night's game is up towards the top. It's got to be top two or top three. That was an incredible atmosphere, an incredible game, and just wow, what a statement win from Ed Cooley in this squad. Incredible.
We're going to be breaking it all down in this episode and looking ahead to another home game on Saturday against St. John's. They get the noon slate there. A couple reminders here before we get into it. First, we've teamed up with SeatGeek this season to get you the best deals for tickets to your favorite teams. SeatGeek takes the confusion out of buying tickets, and they're here to give you some great deals. Get in on the fun and head over to SeatGeek, download their app, and use code NCAA Hoops Digest for $20 off your first purchase. If you're looking for tickets to that game on Saturday, you saw how fun it looked last night and you want to get in on it, use that code. Go treat yourself. Get yourself tickets. Another reminder, this podcast is presented by House Enterprise and in partnership with House of College Hoops. Head over to our site, house-enterprise.com for more info.
Thanks for those two ad reads, Matt. I'm going to plug one more thing here. If you haven't seen it already, we have a new shirt on the House-Enterprise store. The amp where ranked teams come to die with a nice little logo of Friar Dom at the bottom. If you don't believe it and you didn't believe it, hopefully last night proved it to you that yes, the Amico Mutual Pavilion, the Dunkin' Donuts Center, the Providence Civic Center, whatever you want to call that building, that is where ranked teams come to die. Head to house-enterprise.com, get the shirt, rep it at the amp. You got to do it now. If you're an avid listener of this podcast or you're just an avid Providence fan in general, that t-shirt needs to be in your closet or your wardrobe. What be it, go buy the shirt.
Yeah, this is two ranked teams now this season, both of them that have come into the building. The Friars have beaten. The only other Big East team ranked at the moment is Xavier. They won't see the Musketeers until the last week of the regular season. So we'll have to wait a little bit on that opportunity. We'll see who else gets ranked here in the meantime. I suspect we're going to see the Friars ranked when the polls come out next week, barring something unexpected on Saturday. The Friars are going to be up there after this win. 73-61, Providence win against UConn. First game against them in that building since, I believe, 2013.
2012,
almost a full. Was it 2012? All right.
I think so.
Something in that range. So around a decade here. And I think kind of the first thing that stood out to me about this game was just how long they led and kind of controlled the game. It seemed like they kind of took it over there in the first half, and that was about it. They led for 22 minutes, led for over 56% of the game. UConn's last lead was when it was 28-27. In the first half, the Friars took over and never looked back. And that's incredible to do it against a team that's, quite frankly, as good as this UConn team is.
Yeah, Matt, I was really impressed with our, composure with the lead, especially against a team like UConn, and not to mention this is a UConn team that's just coming off of a double-digit loss at Xavier. So I was definitely impressed and a little surprised by our ability to hold that lead. Like you said, the first half or most of the first half was kind of back and forth with UConn taking 5 to 7 point leads for a majority of it. But then, man, that Corey Floyd 3-pointer at the end of the shot clock. That was a big middle finger to Dan Hurley and the Huskies. And that was the big momentum shift, in my opinion. That was when the crowd that was already into it got even more into it. That was when, the players got into it. Cooley was getting the fans revved up. That was the big momentum swing and the turning point of the first half. And like you said, the Friars didn't look back after that.
Yeah, they took control. I think there were a couple of really big moments that stood out from this one, and that's the first one that jumps out. Jared Bynum had an abdominal injury there about halfway through the first half, and so Ed Cooley had to go deep into the bench with the guards and rely on guys to give him good minutes. I wouldn't say this was identical to like Bryson Goodine, given the Friars a good game last year, but I think there's a similar. I mean, I think Corey Floyd showed more in this one game than we'd seen from Bryson Goodine the entire time he was in Friartown.
Yeah.
But I did think like that was a very impressive performance from Floyd in that situation.
No, I agree. And I think in the second half too, you saw Floyd really locked in defensively. I'm sure, he had a chip on his shoulder. This was a game circled on his calendar. Just for personal reasons, he used to play at UConn. But no, you're absolutely right. It wasn't the Bryson Goodine coming in and not really doing anything except for that one game where he had 12 points off of a bunch of made threes. This was like a solid defensive game from Corey Floyd that was highlighted by that monstrous three. Really good depth off the bench from him. I thought Pierre gave some good minutes as well. Like you said, with Bynum out, Pierre is really the only other true point guard that's received significant playing time this season. So I thought he had some good minutes as well. But you got to keep in mind, this is a big moment for two guys that have not played in that moment before. And I thought,
Yeah.
given the circumstances, they lived up to the moment just fine.
Yeah, I did not think we were going to see any Corey Floyd in this one. And that's why we didn't really touch on that as a storyline. This is the first intra-conference Big East transfer getting minutes against his old team. And we kind of figured, well, he's 10th guy in the rotation right now, 9th or 10th, depending on where you put Castro in there.
Yeah.
He's just not gonna get minutes in a game like this. And the situation demanded it, and he rose to it. I think we should just walk through this game kind of from start to finish here,
Yeah.
because I just the first 4 minutes, 8 minutes, first couple of media timeouts there, and the way that they settled into the game, I thought was really impressive, and the way that they hung with UConn. I thought the defense set the tone early.
I think so too. And I think you can look at really like the first couple minutes there. UConn takes a 7-2 lead. And, I think Friars teams of the past will get into a bigger hole than that. But, a couple of made field goals and I think it was a Devin Carter three later, and the ball game's tied 7-7. And I think you have to credit the defense for holding UConn there too. Because then after that, it was punch, counter punch. And like you said, the defense, I think especially in the paint, what we did on Adama Sanogo and Donovan Clingan was huge because especially, I mean, not jumping ahead here, but you look at the second half, Sanogo didn't score. And that's a credit to Ed Croswell, who we'll talk about in a little bit, but also Clifton Moore, who I thought gave some really meaningful minutes off the bench too. But I
And
think,
obviously, yeah,
yeah, I think that the defensive tone was set in the first half, and you answered that 7-2 run, and that was what set the tone right there and put the foundation in place for what we saw the rest of the game.
yeah, and I think what stood out right off the bat was it seemed like the game plan was going to be just to um, deny anything going inside, deny anything to Snogo, make his life hell, even trying to get the basketball. I thought they executed that incredibly well, and you forced UConn to take those threes, which they're they're not a bad 3-point shooting team. But I think on the
No.
road here is where they're having the issues, because this is back-to-back games now where they've chucked up threes and they haven't hit them. Head Cooley said, we're gonna dare you to take those shots instead
Yeah.
of getting inside on us. You mentioned those two guys defensively. I know we're going to talk about Bryce Hopkins on offense. I thought
Mhm.
Hopkins was excellent defensively. There were points where he was matched up with Klingon and Sanogo, and like he saw
Yep.
everybody on UConn. Didn't shy down from a single matchup. He made it so hard. Like he is not going to do anything against Donovan Klingon if Klingon has the basketball and can face up.
Yeah.
So he just did everything he could to prevent that from happening.
Right. And I think, what stood out to me is when you look at the way Hopkins was guarding those two guys, Sonogo and Klingon, he wasn't, between them in the basket. And I think one of the principles of guarding in the post is you got to be between your man and the basket. Instead, he was facing them, just trying to prevent any sort of entry pass with his arm up. And I thought that was a fantastic, fantastic matchup decision by the coaching staff to have them guard like that. Because if you have Adama Sanogo backing into the hoop, chances are he's going to get that layup. He's a big, strong man. He's preseason player of the year for a reason. Donovan Clingan is 7'2", 265. If you are between him and the basket, he's just going to hook right over you. But instead, what Hopkins and Croswell really were doing is you were denying those entry passes. You were in front of your man, which is what they don't teach you in basketball 1-on-1, 101. So I think that was a great adjustment and a great defensive game plan for our bigs.
Yeah. And the other part of that you need to make that successful is you need good defensive guards because if that happens, you can have guys getting sealed off and guys driving to the basket, and you can get taken advantage of with the pick and roll about
Yep.
high. And that's an issue. That's an area where the Friars have had an issue defending the 3-point line this year, and they did an admirable job. UConn still
Yeah.
got some good looks at points, and that didn't fall, but it was hard work to get them. I thought, who stood out to me on defense? We're gonna talk about like Alan Breed and Corey Floyd and guys like that who played well. Noah Locke, I think,
Yeah,
had maybe his
I
best
knew you were gonna say
defensive
that.
game in Providence.
I mean, hell, Noah Locke had his best all-around game in the Providence uniform last night. But I think you're right, Matt. Noah Locke was second on the team in minutes with 34, and I think that speaks volumes too, especially given the usage that we've seen out of him over the Big East play so far. He's kind of hot in the beginning. He'll stay in the game, but this was the most complete defensive, offensive game that Noah Locke has produced. And you're right, the defense was pleasantly surprising out of him. I thought he did a great job.
Jumping, getting in the way of balls. I will say I know we've had issues with especially Donnie Marshall on the call for these games. I actually thought he did a really good job calling this. I thought the broadcast team in general did. They got some of the details wrong. They definitely got like names and stuff wrong, but they both of the guys had brought energy and knew a lot of the defensive stuff. And this was a defensive battle for most of the night, and they did a really good job of pointing out the good plays that people were making and talking about deflections, guys getting their hands on balls. And I think we saw every Friar who played get their hand on a ball somewhere on defense. That's what it felt like.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I was at the game, so I didn't hear the commentators, but I'll take your word on it. I like to tease because Donnie Marshall is typically the UConn homer, but no, I think you're right. And I think when you look at what the way the game unfolded, just on the eye test alone, you can't look at that game and think, wow, this isn't a defensive slugfest. I mean, it just from start to finish, UConn was held to their lowest point total of the season. That was impressive. That was a good old fashioned Big East rock fight. That's the way Dave Gavitt would have wanted it, just like that.
Yeah. Yeah, and look at the defense of the Friars just right now in the way that they have locked in recently. 61 points to UConn, 59 to DePaul, 52 to Butler. Ever since that game against Marquette, where things were rough, they have turned it around, and that's after Christmas there. Before we keep going, we got a commenter here. Mr. Kevin Troy coming in. We had somebody come in and set an over-under for tall boys for last night. So Kev's asking, did we hit it? I had one at home.
So
did you have 11 then?
No, this is going to be a really anticlimactic answer. I did not. I had 0 alcoholic beverages at the game. I actually had a bottle of water. So there were 2 UConn fans in our section, 3 UConn fans in our section, and they were being very aggressive with their chirping, and I wanted to have my wits about me. And also, I had lost my voice after the first 15 minutes of the game, so I bought a bottle of water at halftime. And I had to work today. I knew I was going to be home late last night, so I didn't want to add any additional stress or exhaustion to my day today. So I did not consume any tall boys. Is the long answer? No,
Joe. I think we're growing up right now. Is this what this is? Is this what it feels like?
This is called trying to act like a college student at 24 years old, almost 25 years old.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Well, thank you for the question there, Kev. Yeah, I always appreciate him listening.
Yeah. Love Kev.
But love Kev. Back to the game here. So we talked about the defense there in the first half, keeping them in it. The offense, I think, also did like just enough. It's the offense. It wasn't great, but it's a UConn defense that's really, really, really good. I was impressed by the defense, and I think they did a really good mix of forcing UConn into situations where they'd have to foul, knowing that this is a UConn team that fouls like crazy.
Yeah.
By the way, I looked up this number. UConn sends their opponents to the line more than 21 times per game on average.
I mean, I believe it. We saw it last night. And someone on Twitter tweeted this before. If you're listening, I forget what your handle is, and I'm going to give you credit, even though I don't know who you are. The way UConn guards is they swat and they look for blocks. And I think that leads to a lot of foul calls versus on the other end, PC guys, Friars, try to wall up and keep their arms straight up. 8 times out of 10 that's going to work. The other 2 times they're going to call you for the body foul. But I think when you try and swat and you try and go for blocks, that's when you get foul calls. So it makes sense. The eye test definitely matches that analysis. But you're right, Matt. UConn fouls a lot. And
Yeah.
I'll tell you, if Dan Hurley doesn't like the officiating calls are called on UConn, the fan base absolutely matches as well, because the UConn fans that were at the AMP last night, and trust me, there were a lot of them there, did not like the foul calls. Not one bit.
No. No. To be fair, I don't think there's a single fan that's ever liked a call that's gone against their team. But
But
yeah.
Hawkins could have wound up and punched Bynum in the face, and they would have been like, "No, that's on Bynum."
That
Like,
was clear.
I was clean. It was just a little shove.
It's a block, not a charge. Yeah, I actually just checked the number. That was the number I was citing from last night before the sports reference page got updated. So it's up to over 22 free throws allowed by this UConn defense now. And I agree wholeheartedly. They look for a lot of steals and swipe a lot. I think they also just play aggressive on-ball defense. They will come out really far away from the basket and guard you all the way in. And that's just more time for contact to happen, more time to get beaten by a half step. I think the other issue we've seen with the Friars, when they don't guard well, they aren't close enough to foul you. Like they'll just leave guys open, and UConn's never doing that. They're too good at defense to do that. So I thought the Friars passed well into looks that would force UConn to foul and draw that and just get to the line, because they weren't getting separation.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. And the first, 15 minutes of the game, we did look a little bit uncomfortable with UConn's tight defense. The on-ball pressure was really, really good by the Huskies. And I think, it kind of dissipated a little bit in the second half as they became a little bit more frantic defensively. But in the first half, you really saw it. You had guys were in Bynum shorts basically every time he had the basketball at the top of the key.
And then it got worse once he came out too. The Friars had a stretch there where they were just trying to figure out how they were going to generate any kind of offense, and there were long stretches where I wasn't sure how the Friars were going to get the ball inside the 3-point arc.
Yeah,
like they went. I think the first possession of the game, I don't think they ever got it inside the arc, if I'm remembering correctly. First or second possession, one of those, and I'll credit the UConn defense there. It's for a lot of the first half, it felt like a game that UConn was outplaying Providence, and the Friars were just hanging around. And Andre Jackson was fouled, and I was kind of concerned. All right, Andre Jackson's going to come back, and UConn's going to lead a charge, and that's where I think the Providence you get the run right there at the end of the first half, and the way they played in the second half to just make shots and put UConn away was incredibly impressive. Probably the biggest accomplishment we've seen from the team this year.
Yeah, and I think your point that you brought up before, Matt, that this wasn't the best offensive performance by the Friars is definitely well taken. We only shot 36% from the field, but our offense did enough to match what our defense was doing to UConn. And I think that was the recipe for success last night. Obviously, you're not going to blow teams out by 20 each and every night, especially when you're playing the fourth-ranked team in the country. But if your offense can do enough to keep up with your defense, you're going to be successful. And I think last night is the epitome of that statement.
Exactly. And that's the defense rose to meet the occasion. That is absolutely for sure with the way it looked. It looked kind of sketchy at points. Like it looked bad against Marquette, and the opponent since then, before UConn, hadn't really. I don't think we were sure if it was just the opponent or the defense getting better. I think now we know it's the defense. And yeah, we've spent too long on this podcast without talking about Bryce Hopkins. In what he ended up doing, because he was the only thing on offense that was consistently working. In the first half, he worked all day long. 27 points for him. He only made 4 2-pointers. He was 4 of 10 inside the arc. He knocked down both of his 3-point attempts. He was 13 of 15 from the free throw line, and then 5 rebounds, only 1 turnover. He had a block in there, and he was. I think the way that he changed the game here was UConn did not have somebody who could guard him.
Yep.
And that meant they had to sacrifice offense to put somebody out there who could guard him.
The point in the game when I think I realized that Danny Hurley was sweating was when they put Adama Sanogo on Bryce Hopkins, and the next offensive possession, Cooley calls ISO for Hopkins on Sanogo, and Hopkins takes him to the rack and gets fouled. I think that was the turning point in the game where everyone kind of realized, like, Hurley doesn't have an answer for Hopkins, because I think it was Caravan that was on him for most of the first half there,
That
and
was rough.
Hopkins was had a clear mismatch. My dad likes to say mouse in the house, when it's like a big guy on like a mouse, like that's what it was like. And you could just see Hurley's like his brain's churning. He's trying to figure it out. You put Adama Sanogo on him, he's going to take him right to the rack too. So I think that was the point in the game when you realize Hopkins is going to take over. And you're right, a lot of his points didn't even come from the field; they came from the free throw line. But again, that's when you get fouled, chances are you're going to miss that shot.
Yeah,
So
and
it
that's
makes sense.
and UConn right now does not have an athletic enough guy at the four to stay in front of him when he drives. That
Yep.
was the issue. They couldn't stay in front of him, and he was drawing contact every single time because of that and getting to the
Yeah.
line. And that's where I think if Hopkins, that's where it's crazy that I think Hopkins can take it to the next level because I still think he can finish some of those looks through the
Yeah.
contact and all that. And that's where it's like this will go from 27 to 35 at
Yeah.
some point. And that's gonna happen against one of these teams. But yeah, there's Ryan Cassidy for Road to the Garden with us. He put up a video, I think last night or this morning, with just Hopkins highlights. And like
Yeah.
in the first half, like every single one of them is him just taking Caravan to the hole over and
Yeah.
over and over again. And I will say he did get called for that charge in the second half. And they actually talked about it on the broadcast in the first half because Caravan got called for a block on that same thing
Hmm.
earlier. And Danielle Marshall made a good call in that he was saying, hey, that's actually a charge if Caravan takes it and makes it a charge instead of just
Yeah.
bouncing off the contact, which
Yeah.
to his credit, he did.
That's
That's where Hopkins probably needs to dial it down from like 10 to an 8 so he doesn't get
yeah.
called for that, but it didn't cost you anyway.
When when that call was called, obviously Cooley got excited. And the whole fan base got excited. The whole arena got excited. Of course, you don't want to see that call. Once the dust settled, Cooley, mouthed to the bench, that was a good call. Like that was the right call. That was a foul. And you're right. It was the right call. I think in the moment you don't want that call, and you don't want. Not only do you not want that call, you don't want anything that's going to shift the momentum, and
No.
it did. It didn't, thankfully, but that's the
It
type
looked
of
like
call
it
that.
could have for a second there.
Right, exactly. It looked like it was Hopkins is taking over. They're going to call a charge on him, or they're going to call an offensive on him. Like, no, it didn't. It
And
didn't
that was
change
his
anything.
fourth foul, correct?
It was his fourth foul.
That's where there was that one stretch, and I think this was not the turning point. It was the absence of a turning point here that's notable. So that Bottom's out, and you get Hopkins with four fouls, and those are your top guard and top forward. And all right, UConn's within I don't know, it's like 7 or 8 points, I think, at that point, with however much time was left, and Hopkins is going to ride the bench for a little bit here. That was the opportunity for UConn to try to get back into this one. And the
Yeah.
Friars did a really, really good job of defending on the next couple of sequences. They got a couple of points. I think that's where that Ed Croswell run out and dunk came from. I could
Yep.
be mistaken. I think it was in that sequence.
No,
And
you're
it
right.
just it turned and the Friars took an even bigger lead there. And that was where it was all right. Well, this was UConn's opportunity. They didn't do anything with it.
This is where the play of Ed Croswell, Devin Carter, Clifton Moore, Noah Locke, Alan Breed really comes into play here. Their play comes into play. Really bad word choice, but whatever. This is where they really started to make a difference. And I think something my girlfriend actually texted me this in the minute, and in the moment I didn't realize is that we were beating UConn on every 50-50 ball. We were diving for every single loose ball, 50-50 ball, and we were winning them. We were just simply out hustling UConn. And that was without Bynum, without Hopkins on the floor. And I think that starts with Devin Carter and the energy and the intensity that he brought to this game. He had, what was that, 11 points? Hold on, pulling up the box sheet. Carter had 11 points, 4 rebounds, a block, and a steal. And that doesn't even the stat line doesn't even encompass the impact that he had on the game.
Mm-hmm.
Fighting for loose balls, diving. I think probably the biggest thing that he did is he could have gone out in transition and dunked it, but I think he pulled back to kill clock with about 3 or less in the second half. I think that was a really, really smart play by him because you can go out and you can dunk it, but then UConn gets the ball back with a couple of minutes left. Instead, you wind down the clock, you start milking it, and then all of a sudden, you score on that possession and UConn is running out of time.
Yeah. Speaking of that, Devin Carter also had that absolutely ridiculous 3-pointer where he could get no separation from Andre Jackson and just had to put a shot up and nailed it.
Yeah,
Which that's the other thing. UConn's got a good defense. If you want to beat this team, you're gonna have to hit tough shots.
yeah,
But that's going to be part of it. There's going to be if you're only hitting the good shots, you're not going to score that often. So you have to have shot makers. And Devin Carter was a guy who was not a shot maker last year, and he has
no,
taken a step in that regard. I don't know if you're going to get that level of play from him for the rest of the season, but you don't need to. This was the one game where you needed that to beat this team. You don't need that to beat Butler or DePaul or
yeah,
Georgetown. You don't need those. You don't need that type of thing. You need them to be able to flip that switch when there's a tight moment there. And I think that's the other thing that stood out. The Friars had guys who hit big, big, big shots in this game. And for the
yeah,
second game in a row here on the road, UConn missed every big shot that they needed.
yeah. I mean, it got to a point where, and looking back, this probably isn't the best comment to make, but where the UConn fans in my section are chirping, so I decide I'm going to chirp back. And every time UConn dialed up a three, I said, "Oh, please take it again, take another
Yep.
one." And now that I'm at a level mindset, I realize that's probably not the best comment to make, because if they hit one of those threes, which they are good at doing, minus the past two games, then you kind of look like a jackass. But in the moment last night, it worked and really chafed the fan base. But the point is true that UConn hasn't been able to hit threes in big moments in back-to-back games on the road. Matt, I think this is a point you brought up on the Road to the Garden podcast, and it's that UConn has been good in games where they're blowing teams out. It's in these tighter contests that they're really starting to struggle, and it's being put on full display nationally. They're in a tight back and forth game with Xavier. They lose by 10. They're in a tight back and forth game at Providence. They lose by 12. I mean, really the only tight game that they won was against Villanova.
Yeah. And that Oklahoma State game got tight at a point, but not really. It was not,
Yeah.
it ended up as a 10-point game, but it wasn't close. The Georgetown game was close in the second
Okay.
half
I
there.
forgot about
But
that one.
that was at home.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of the difference is this team is a little bit UConn's different on the road.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think you look at the box score and it's Tristan Newton, who's a guy who I think can be an all Big East guard if he plays up to it. 6 points, 3 of 11 from the field. Joey Calcaterra, who's been dynamite for them. Goose egg, no points. Andre Jackson, just 3 points. He was 0 for 3 from deep. Naheem Aline, 2 points. Hassan Diarra, a single point. That is their backcourt outside of Hawkins.
Yeah.
They got 12 points out of all of those players without a single made 3-pointer.
Yeah.
And that's a huge I mean, those are good players. And part of that is that they've had these issues. The other part is that when the Friars defense stepped up to an unbelievable degree, I mean, Alan Breed was so good on defense. And everybody was. They switched everything perfectly.
Forget defense. Alan Breed is the player from this game that isn't getting enough attention. And it's because, the numbers on the stat sheet don't really jump out at you when you look at Alan Breed. I think the best stat he has on there is 5 rebounds. But his composure with the basketball late in the game when Jared Bynum is out, that was huge. And again, that's not a number that shows up on the box score on any sort of analytic, but the way he was able to compose himself and essentially run the point guard spot in the absence of your starting point guard in Jared Bynum, that's huge. And the fact that he was able to do that against this Connecticut backcourt is even bigger. So Alan Breed deserves a ton of credit for the game that he put together, 30 minutes off the bench. That was a big boy performance from Alan Breed. Major onions out of him.
Yeah. And if I told you coming into this game, Jared Bynum is going to get hurt partway through and not be able to complete the game. Bryce Hopkins is going to get himself into foul trouble. And here's another thing. The Friars did not get any second chance points until the very end of the first half. There was a point I think at the end of the first half, UConn had 11 offensive rebounds and Providence had 10 defensive.
Yeah.
So the Friars were getting killed on the glass in the first half. Those guys go out and all that. If I told you that, you're going to assume we're losing this game by 10 to 15 points.
Yep.
And the fact that they gutted out a win anyway is a huge credit to the toughness of this team and the coaching of Ed Cooley.
You know what actually surprised me too on the topic of rebounds? I didn't know Ed Croswell had a double-double. That was a very, very sneaky double-double. I knew he was in double figures, and maybe it's just because the box score that they have at the amp on the big screen doesn't show rebounds and it shows fouls instead. But I didn't know that he had 13 boards. That's really good.
Yeah, he had 8 of them on the defensive end, which I think that was the biggest thing where the team really stepped up in the second half was
Yeah,
just cutting down the offensive rebound
yeah.
opportunities for UConn. They had 11 in the first half, cut it down to 8 in the second half, which is just enough. And they cut down the second chance points there too, and that's all they needed to do. Like they were really good at preventing extra opportunities down the stretch, really good at making the ones that they gave up hard to finish, and that's what you need. I mean, Ed Croswell against Sonogo was as impressive as any of one of us could have expected.
I mean, in our pregame show, Matt, you and I both said that if Sonogo outscores Croswell and is better on the stat sheet, but Providence wins and Croswell holds his own, we'll consider that a win for Ed Croswell. And Croswell not only outperformed Sonogo, he outscored him, out rebounded him, and Providence won. Like, we were down on Croswell in the pregame show, for lack of a better, analysis here, and he outplayed the Big East preseason player of the year. And I know you already saw this, but if you watch the post-game press conference and you hear Ed Croswell's quote on Sonogo, he said, "Yeah, we made eye contact, and I told him, yeah, we got you." Like, man, good for Croswell. I love the chippiness. I'll
Yeah,
tell you, that's
my favorite little chippiness thing in this whole thing, the pettiest thing in the world. After the game, Devin Carter goes and retweets the UConn final score post and not the Providence one. Just hilarious stuff.
well, you know what though? I'll say this from a fan's perspective and like from a program perspective. If you're UConn and your fan base wants to run its mouth about how Providence game isn't a rivalry, but then the UConn Twitter account tweets out a rivalry renewed, you're gonna make yourself you make
Yeah.
yourselves look like jackasses. Excuse my French, but you make yourselves look in a you shed a light on yourselves that makes you look terrible after you lose by 12 to the team that's not your rival. Okay,
And
well,
you see what Dan Hurley said after? He said the loss was embarrassing. Embarrassing is losing at home to Georgetown, which this team almost did.
right.
Losing
This
losing a conference road game against a good team is not embarrassing. So yeah, it's a very condescending from Dan Hurley.
Dan Hurley is, and I was talking about this with my brother before. Dan Hurley is the new Steve Wojciechowski of the Big East Conference. UConn came back to the conference, and every team, all of the other teams, hate them. All of the other coaches hate Dan Hurley because he runs his mouth and he says comments like that. He's the biggest mental midget in the conference. I'm sorry, get me on a Dan Hurley spiral, and I'll just keep spewing. But a comment like that, losing to a team that is receiving votes in the AP Top 25, has shown significant improvement over the course of the past month, is on a what is it now, 9-0, 8-0 win streak, and is undefeated in conference play. Losing on the road at that team's building is an embarrassing loss. Really? You held us to
Yeah.
36% from the field. Is that really embarrassing? No. You're just being a condescending prick in the post-game press conference.
Yeah, I just totally uncalled for there.
Yeah.
I know we're getting a little bit short on time here, so I gotta run after this. So we'll wrap up with a couple things on this, and then look ahead to the St. John's game
Yep. Let's do
on
it.
Saturday. Friars moved up big time in Ken Palm with this one, which is huge. I just want to point out again here, the metrics like Providence more than the resume based stuff at this point because the Friars have a couple bad losses in there and a win against. Uh, some of the teams that they were beaten in December there doesn't really register for the net. It does register when you crush Albany by like 40 points, like they did. That looks good in the metrics because you're playing good basketball, and that's where this team has shot up. They're now they're up to 28 in the country. At the start of December, where they tipped off against URI, they were at 81.
Wow.
That's I've never seen the team move quite that fast, that far in Ken Palm. The way that they've turned it around is crazy. An 8-game win streak is currently the nation's 7th longest active win streak. They're up to the 5th for offensive rebounding percentage. This is now considered a top 25 offense in efficiency and is 61st in defense. So just a note here. There's an old document that I've seen get passed around. It's called the 12 factors that you need.
I know.
And it's
Yep.
factors that typically NCAA tournament champions have. And one of the ones is that it's usually having a top 20 Ken Palm offense and a top 40 to 60 Ken Palm defense. Like it's you have to be either top 20 offense, top 60 defense, or top 40 offense, top 40 defense, something along those lines. And this team's really freaking good right now.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to laugh. Everything you said is correct. I'm looking at the Twitter stream right now, and I have it open on my phone. One of the comments is, "Last night, my 4-year-old son was yelled at by UConn fans." Oh man, that's just.
Oh my goodness.
Um, but yes,
Yeah.
you're right, Matt. The improvement that we've seen over the past month and change from this Friars team is incredible, and the statistics and the analytics like us. Like you said, we've taken a huge jump in Ken Palm. I think we're up in the net now too. We started at
Up to
151.
30.
We're now at 33. Um,
Yep.
and again, defensively, we're not where Cooley teams have been historically, but I think we're holding our own at this point. I mean, it's definitely improved since the Miami St. Louis skid back in November. So really, really good spot that we're in right now. Hopefully, the momentum can keep rolling, and this can translate to a couple of more wins and an AP ranking. I think you're right that when you look at the AP poll, it doesn't always encompass all of the little nitty gritty things. A lot of it is, voter bias or voter laziness or lack thereof. So I think there's a lot of different things that you have to take into account when you evaluate a college basketball team. I also think the eye test is a big one, taking things back a step analytically. And you look at the togetherness and the composure of the team. Let's look at that TCU loss. They did not look like a team there. They looked like a bunch of different pieces that were playing really different types of basketball. You look at, the game after that and forward, and it's been a completely different, output on the court.
Yeah, here's something for you. I know when I've mentioned this before, so I had to check it again. Since December 1st, according to Bart Torvik, this is the sixth most efficient team in the country.
Yeah.
This team is playing like forget about being ranked. Providence right now is playing as well as anybody. There's no I'm convinced right now, at least on the home floor, they could play with any team in the country.
Yeah.
And to get to that point from where this team was in November is incredibly impressive. A testament to the coaching staff. And they get one more game in this building here coming up before another trip to the Midwest. They're gonna head back out there next week. They get St. John's at home on Saturday at noon. This is a St. John's team that's in disarray. They had a lead against Marquette at home and then completely blew it in the second half. Andre Curbelo was suspended, apparently snuck back in for the press conference. I don't know what's going on with this program right now. They don't have a true road win this year.
No, and you know what, Matt? I don't want to say this because it's factually incorrect, but I'm going to try and maneuver my way around it. They don't have a Big East win within the window of conference play. I know they beat DePaul early on, but that was technically a week before conference play officially started, where all of the teams were playing conference games. So yes, on the stat sheet, they have a Big East win. But since Big East play officially tipped and all the teams were matched up against other Big East teams, St. John's does not have a win. And this was a St. John's team that was racking up non-conference wins against, really insignificant teams. And, I fell victim to it too, I had St. John's, I was high on them just because of the win total alone. And, I've completely debunked that, point of view over the past couple of games just because of how terribly they're playing. And really, really bad stuff out of, Queens. And I think when I watched that FS1 all access game, Mike Anderson just does not have any passion on the sidelines, like none.
Except for just yelling, "Move,
move, move, move." You've got Sean Miller cursing on national television, and you've got a repeating CD of Mike Anderson saying the same words. So,
Saturday's a game you can't lose. It's going to be a motivated St. John's team for sure. They lost 4 in a row, but right now, I mean, they only have one win outside of New York City this year, and that was against Florida State in the Orange Bowl Classic, whatever they call it, that thing in December against a terrible Florida State team. And they don't have they only have. Yeah, I think they only have 3 other road games that they've played, and they lost all of them. They got killed by Iowa State in non-conference, and they have talent on paper, but I think this team was not very good last year, and it got worse because they lost Champagny
Yeah,
and they lost all of their shooters. This
yeah.
team has no scoring ability in the half court, and quite frankly, do you want to let Devin Carter and Bryce Hopkins play in transition? If St. John's wants to play this game at that speed, I'll take that. And yeah, St. John's might score 80. Friars are going to score 100 if we play it like that.
I remember, Matt, great point. The game we played against them at Carneseca last year, they were letting us get whatever we wanted in transition. I think Horkler and Bynum were huge with transition threes. If they want to do that this year, please go right ahead,
Yeah,
because we saw what happened when Marquette did it. You know, when you get our athletes, I'm not even going to call them players. When you get our athletes in transition, we are a very tough offense to beat, especially
and I
when you
think
have the steam train of Bryce Hopkins chugging
barreling
down
down
into the
on you.
paint. Yeah.
Yeah, and Noah Locke hitting threes. I don't even think we touched on it in the recap. So real quick, he had that three late off the offensive rebound, the
Oh
in
my
rhythm
God.
deep three that slid in, amazing. He's hitting shots right now. Who's 3 of 6 from deep. If you get that Noah Locke who's splashing in transition with the other guys, you're gonna have so much space to do stuff. And
Yeah.
I'm sure St. John's is gonna score. I'm sure this game is gonna be competitive in stretches,
Oh yeah.
but it's one the Friars should win comfortably if
I,
they
I
play their game.
given the state of, where the Providence team is right now versus where St. John's is, you need to beat them. Like there's no if, ends, or buts about it. This is a must win in every sense of the word. This is a game that you cannot drop. With that said, I think St. John's will be competitive. They're going to play desperate. They're going to come into this one thinking, all right, Providence is top dog in the conference right now. They're undefeated in conference play, just knocked off top 4 UConn. We want to beat them because that's going to help pick up our season. Like we need to shut the door. We need to shut the door fast. It can
Yep.
still be competitive if Providence is leading. Like St. John's can still score and play well, but you need to make this one over really soon if you're the Providence Friars.
Yeah, St. John's comes into this one 107 in the net. So this actually is a quad 3 game at the
Ugh.
moment. And St. John's schedule too. Let me just read you off St. John's schedule here, and we'll go after that. So they go to Providence. They host Butler next week. That's a very winnable game for them.
Yeah,
Then they
that is.
travel to UConn. They play Villanova. They travel to Creighton. They host Georgetown and Seton Hall after that, which is a pair of winnable games. But before we even get to those, they might be 2-8 to start conference play, and that's your season's over at that point.
Yeah. I mean, I'm looking at the stretch right now. The Butler game is winnable. Depending on how things go, the Villanova game is winnable, but really it's not. And the Georgetown game, you can chalk up the W on that one right now just because of the state of that program. But really,
That'll get you to 3-8. Like
yeah,
that's
yeah.
This is you have to crush St. John's in this one, I
Yeah.
think. And this is, if you want to set yourself apart right now, you look at the games last year where you go to Butler and you're without Al Durham and you have a rough time, or you host DePaul on a Saturday night and you have a rough time. This can't be one of
No.
those. It can be, and you can still win, and it'll be all right. But you're gonna get penalized for playing a close game against a bad team.
Yeah.
The Friars are good enough to kill them. You should do to this team what you just did to DePaul and Butler on the road.
When we finished our non-conference schedule, Matt, I forget which show this was, but I said Providence is entering conference play essentially with a blank resume. You won the games in the out-of-conference schedule that you were supposed to win. You dropped ones against teams where, at the end of the day, the committee isn't going to slap you on the wrist too hard for those, because Miami and TCU are both highly ranked, really good teams. The St. Louis, they're competitive. They're not as highly ranked as the other two, but that's still not a terrible loss.
Mm-hmm.
If you lose to St. John's, there's the blemish on the resume, because now we go into conference play with a blank resume. Now we have a really good resume. 2 top 25 ranked wins. You're undefeated in conference play. You're doing it in the way that the analytics prefer. You're blowing teams out that you're supposed to. If you lose to St. John's at home, this is the blemish on your resume that drops you down a couple of seeds in March.
And you might not be ranked because of it. But you beat this team. I think you should be a top 20 team. I'd have the Friars top 15 if you do what you should against St. John's. I don't think they'll be that high, but that's where I would have them, just given the type of basketball they're playing right now.
Agreed.
We'll see what ends up happening. That'll be the noon game on FS1. That'll happen at the same time as the Creighton at UConn game, which is going to be nationally televised on Saturday. So just get your snacks now, or maybe order some food and just sit on the couch and I don't know. You know what I'm going to do? I'm probably going to have the Friars game on the TV, the other one on my laptop, and just be watching both at the same time and enjoying it. Because that's a great slate of basketball.
Yeah, maybe I can have some tall boys for this game, but that UConn game I could.
No, 8:30 on a weeknight there on the road. For was on the road for you having to drive up. Yeah, that's
No, I
tough.
took the train up.
Well, I mean, sorry,
Oh,
driving
well,
back.
yeah, same difference. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. That's gonna do it for us on this one. I think we could probably do a show on Saturday after the game.
probably.
Yeah, so we could do something then. But for now, that's gonna do it for us. That's Joe Howie. I am Matt St. Jean. Follow us on Twitter at the Flex Hoops, and we'll see you on Saturday.
Go Friars.